Senator McLucas. Senator Rhiannon.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. It's a week since Treasurer Joe Hockey said, if housing were unaffordable in Sydney, no one would be buying it. This disastrous bit of ad-libbing from the Treasurer gives us a useful insight into exactly how out of touch with reality he is. The latest Fairfax Ipsos poll, released a few days ago, shows that 80% of Sydneysiders believe that housing in Sydney is unaffordable. 80%. Just 3% believed local housing in Sydney was very affordable. In 1985, the median price for a house in Sydney was $73,000. In 2015, the median price of a Sydney house has risen to a staggering $900,000 and $1,400,000, 11 times average household earnings. Over that time, the housing price to income ratio in Sydney has grown from 3.4 to 11.4. Over the past 2 years, Sydney house prices have shot up at rates 5 times that of wage growth. Last year, the Demographia International Housing Affordability Survey ranked Sydney as the 3rd least affordable city in the world. 3rd least affordable. That's why this housing issue is so critical. Wage growth is declining, making it more and more difficult for first home buyers to save for a mortgage deposit. This week in Parliament, my colleague Senator Scott Ludlam asked the Coalition why negative gearing and capital gains tax reform was sorely missing from the government's tax review. And on Lateline on Monday night, Senator Cormann was challenged again on this very point. Here was another example of a Coalition spokesperson peddling myths on negative gearing and capital gains tax reform. Over and over, government representatives have repeated the lie that ending negative gearing will push up rents. The data and analysis on this is readily available to the government. They know that that's not the case. There's a long list of economists, unions and independent social support groups in favour of reform. The OECD, the IMF, the Australia Institute, the Grattan Institute, the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute, ACOSS, the Australian Workers Union, the Tenants Union of New South Wales, Homelessness Australia and the Salvation Army. Saul Eslake, a chief economist at Bank of America Merrill Lynch, has described the case for ending negative gearing for new investors as very compelling. Mr Eslake has also discredited some of the main lies being told about negative gearing, among them that it would raise rents. The facts on the problems with negative gearing are not hard to find. But there was a Treasurer suggesting to the Australian people that if they wanted to break into the property market, a market which has swollen enormously, that if they want to break into this housing market, they simply need to get a good job that pays good money. It is an astonishing display of ignorance from a man with a hefty personal investment property portfolio, with a taxable income in the 99th percentile of taxpayers, who lives in the 3rd least affordable city in the world. To borrow a phrase from the Sydney Morning Herald, I would ask Mr Hockey to take a look at the dark side of the boom. Sydney house prices are racing ahead of wage growth. People working full-time on the minimum wage are priced out of the rental market in 99.9% of Sydney suburbs. Home to roughly 4.85 million people of varied income, skills and backgrounds, Sydney is a dynamic, diverse city. We need to cater to and care for the full spectrum of people required to run a city, not just its upper echelons. If lower and medium income earners are forced out of the housing market, they obviously will move. The rental market will continue to expand, as Sydney will be worse off in every sense of the word. The Australian Greens have put forward our plan to tackle this problem. We don't believe that those living on low and middle incomes should be made to subsidise the property investment of others. The Greens have costed our negative gearing reform proposals, and we have identified $4 billion in savings which could be put towards affordable housing supply. This revenue could fund the construction of 7,000 new homes for the homeless by 2020 and 7,500 new social housing dwellings over the forward estimates. And for those of you who aren't from Sydney, when you're in Sydney next, walk through Belmore Park, walk around some of our public spaces. You will see large numbers of tents. Tent cities are growing up in our city because of this serious crisis. Negative gearing is costly, inefficient and inequitable. Honest coalition MPs must know this. If the Treasurer does not agree on the damaging impacts of negative gearing, we invite him and other sceptics to join an evidence-based debate. It is time the Abbott government reviewed the tax arrangements for property investment in order to improve housing affordability for first home buyers and to provide housing for those on social and public housing waiting lists and for those sleeping on our streets.